Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I thought I would actually sit down and do my birth story, which feels quite late now. If you're like new to my channel or not, my little girl Arden is now nearly 16 months, so this is quite a bit after, but I was just conscious that I talked about it a little bit when I had given birth, but I hadn't gone into much detail, and I feel that my birth and labour story was pretty positive, and I feel that the more positive stories that are out there, just the better. My birth story was generally pretty rapid, so this isn't going to be a really long story. I guess a little bit of context. I had, in terms of like labour prep, I had been doing the Positive Birthing Company, like the prenatal labour birth online digital thing, and yeah, I had been watching some bits on my own, and then I'd been making my husband Dan watch bits with me, just sort of depending on which bits I thought were kind of like specifically relevant for him. I'm pretty sure it's like always got a discount going, or I think they reduced the price of it actually, but it's just a collection of videos that you can watch at home that give a really good understanding of hypnobirthing. I also had been gifted a book by a friend. I've actually now passed this book on to another friend. This probably actually was like my Bible. If I had to choose between that or that, I'd potentially go for the book, because for me, I actually learn best like reading stuff, and also it gave like more detail, and around like birth plans or preferences, I found it like the most helpful. Yeah, so the Positive Birth Book by Millie Hill. It looks like this. So yeah, I'd kind of done that, and then we had gone to antenatal classes. We chose to do bump and baby. I found in our area it was slightly cheaper than doing NCT, but obviously there are free ones out there, or you don't even have to do them anyway. I guess, yeah, I think all those things combined really helped me understand what was coming, and I'm definitely one of these people that I have to kind of know the ins and the outs. Some people don't, some people just like to go in a little bit more blind, which I think is fair enough. So yeah, I'd done all of this, and I'd kind of written out my birth preferences, and yeah, I'd had mixed feelings of like definitely do a birth preference or plan, and other people saying like don't bother. And generally I was pretty open to anything. I wanted to predominantly stick to the hypnobirthing, but I wasn't so desperate that I had booked myself into the birthing centre locally, and in an ideal world I quite liked the idea of having a birth pool, but actually I was a little bit unsure about it, just because if I had to go to hospital, it was a good sort of, I think it was a 25-minute car journey, but in an ambulance obviously it'd be a lot quicker, but that just still slightly concerned me. And the hospital that was like my chosen hospital, although it hasn't got the best rep, you had private rooms, and obviously, yeah, it was good for an emergency situation. So anyway, that's kind of where we were at. I just wanted to try and go with the flow as much as possible. I didn't overly like the idea of either an induction or an epidural, probably more squeamish wise than anything, and also I guess from the induction side of things, I hadn't read the most positive things about that. All of that context aside, I hit 40 weeks, I think it was actually on the Monday, and I had a midwife appointment. I don't think I'd been feeling any tweaks or anything, although having said that, now when I look back, I had been feeling something down there, but for me, I don't know what I thought it was. I'm not even sure. I kind of just thought that things were like maybe moving along. Just, it didn't hurt or anything. It was just like a bit of an unusual feeling, I suppose. Anyway, I had my midwife appointment on this Monday. It must have been Monday morning. All was fine, but when she measured my bump, she felt that it was measuring small. I had measured small once, I think, in my whole pregnancy, and I think that was it, and I'd had to go for a growth scan. All was fine in the end, but obviously it's literally just done with a measuring tape, and it can very much just depend on what position the baby was in. So at that point I wasn't really worried, but she wanted me to go for a scan. So the hospital had actually called me and suggested that I went in that afternoon. I think they had an appointment. It wasn't like necessarily an urgent get me in that day. So we headed to hospital then, went for the growth scan, and actually at that point she was concerned and she said that she felt the baby was measuring small. This was like 5 p.m. at this point, so I was getting quite tired. She took us up to triage. So at this point you're starting to get a little bit nervous, but equally I wasn't like still too nervous. They hooked me up to a machine. I think this was probably about 7 o'clock by this point. So like, yeah, time was starting to move. I was starting to get a bit hungry and tired. We had actually packed the hospital bags just in case at this point, and it had quite a lot of snacks in there, I remember, but they were all in the car, so that was obviously a little bit annoying. The midwife or the nurse, I just remember kind of saying, "Can you feel that?" And I just thought, I was like, "Can I feel what?" And she said, "Oh, we are having very, very, very subtle contractions right now." And I was like, "Oh no, I can't really," but you could see it on the monitor, like bleep, bleep, bleep. And then a consultant came in, or a doctor of some kind, and it was all a little bit of a blur then for the next hour, I would say. She started talking about induction, wanting to get the baby out because she was measuring small. And I think at this point I felt quite adamant that there wasn't a problem because there hadn't really been much of an issue with her size the whole entire time. And I just, at this point, felt like it was just, I don't know, I just had a gut feeling that it was fine, and I just really did not want an induction. But I think I went into shock at this point because I started acting quite funny. I couldn't string any sentences together. I literally just couldn't think straight. I think I started to get like an aura. I was probably like from stress, like a bit of a migraine. And Dan was at this point quite worried, and I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't really get my words out, and I was just, I think I started to panic because I had never really envisaged that I'd be having an induction as more of like an emergency situation. So at this point, I think Dan kind of said, "Can we just have a moment to think about it?" And I think we went and sat in the car to just take some deep breaths and to have some snacks. And yeah, we went back, and I had actually, thank goodness, I've got a best friend who's a midwife, but she lives in Australia. But I was like messaging her at this point. It was getting to like 9 p.m. But she was obviously online. And firstly, we were sort of said, "Can't we ask if we could have a C-section instead?" My preference would have been a C-section over an induction personally. I just felt like it, I guess in my head it was a little bit more of like a planned situation, and I just didn't want to be in a situation where I was in labour for like 7 days. So I had asked for this, and the nurse or the doctor kind of said, "Not ideal, but we'd be happy to wait until tomorrow and you can speak to a consultant about it." And I think they were trying to push me off because I don't think they had availability for me to have a C-section in the next day or two. I think that was more the situation. It transpired that the ward was absolutely overrun. As part of my antenatal group, there was like 5 of us in over those few days, and yeah, we kind of all just like missed each other. But anyway, it was getting to like 10 p.m. We were waiting for the midwife to write our notes up, and I was messaging my friend, and she just said, "Have they offered you a sweep?" And I said, "No, they haven't actually." And she was like, "Well, if you don't mind the idea of a sweep, why don't you ask for one?" And at this point I'm thinking I would rather do that, see if things get going, than maybe be inducted like tomorrow or the next day. So I then sort of like said, "Excuse me, could I maybe have a sweep?" "Yeah, if that's what you'd like." Took me into a room and did a sweep. She did say, I think at this point I was like 1 centimetre dilated. My waters hadn't broken or anything. Anyway, she did the sweep. A little bit uncomfortable. I don't think terrible. Anyway, by this point I'm pretty sure we'd gotten home, and I was probably in bed by like half midnight. And so I was knackered basically. Then it gets to like 3 a.m. and I got up, and I just remember needing a wee. I went for a wee, and it was either before or after like the needing a wee that I felt like quite a strong cramp. But I can only really liken this to a very heavy period cramp. And at this point I was thinking, this is just surely cramps from the sweep that I've had. Didn't really like think anything of it. And then it was like an hour later, I must have like managed to like nod off, and then it got to like 4 a.m. and I started to think, these are like these pains, these cramps happening quite regularly actually. So I remember at this point I started timing them on my phone. I literally just got my note app out and I started timing, and like here I've got like 4:08, 4:13, 4:17, 4:20. So at this point, these are like every 3 minutes. And I was thinking, this is a bit odd. So at this point I woke Dan up and I said, "I'm having these cramps. and they're coming very like regularly, so maybe something's going on here. And then it was like about 40 minutes later from like the first one that I called the birth centre. So I'd called the birth centre originally, and they basically said, I'm sorry, but because you're measuring small and there's likelihood that you might have to have an induction, you can't come to us. So like call the hospital. So I called them like 5 minutes later, and she sort of said to me right there and then, right, well, you've kind of got to stay at home for the next couple of hours whilst it's like doing that. And I, again, gut feeling, I just felt like this was more than just, yeah, but you also don't know when it's your first child, do you? You just honestly haven't got really a clue what is going on. I just remember another friend of mine who had a baby, and she had a very, very fast labour, was told to stay at home. By the time they'd like just decided to go to the hospital, she'd basically like nearly given birth in the car. So I think I had that playing in my mind, and because they were coming so regularly, I thought, this is just a bit odd. So this was like 4:50, and the hospital had like said this, and she said another thing as well is that you're able to talk to me. At the point where you can't talk through your contractions is the point where like things are getting going. So I was like, okay. And then it must have then been literally another 20 minutes later, and me and Dan were just like, something, no, like this is too much, because I was struggling at this point. Every time the contraction, now that I know was a contraction and not a cramp, I was shouting for Dan. He was basically at this point, I'm like, I think we need to go to the hospital. And actually I just ignored what the midwife had told me, just went with the gut. And I had half packed the bags already. Dan, I'm pretty sure we'd gone through the bags multiple times, but also I had bought a TENS machine. We hadn't yet had a chance to test it out or try it. So at this point I'm like, Dan, let's like get the TENS machine. So he's like panicking, trying to sort all these leads out of the TENS machine. Now it's quite funny thinking back, and I think I was so far gone with the TENS machine by that point that we were like, just forget it. And I'm shouting at him like, there's my hoodie, grab my hoodie. Yeah, he's just like running around. And at this point I remember thinking, I need to go and like sit on the toilet. Not necessarily because I had an urge either way of anything, but it was like this instinct of go to the toilet. I remember there was a bit of blood, and at this point I think like panic had set in. I don't know why, I just like maybe thought blood isn't normal. There wasn't loads of it, it was just a little bit. And I guess a bit of context, I've had previously had 2 miscarriages, so I suppose a lot of anxiety had come back with that. And at this point, I think you kind of get to a point in labour where you reach this sort of like panic point, and I think that's at this moment when it happened, and it was like the urge to push came on the toilet, and I was like, oh, I just need to push. And Dan kind of came in the loo, and he was like, look, he had to be like quite straight with me. He was like, we either call an ambulance right now, or I have to get you in the car right now. And a little bit of like normality must have come into my head, and I just thought that by the time the ambulance gets here, we could have been at the hospital. So I was like, no, we are getting in the car. So we managed to get in the car. I just remember, I don't know why, I grabbed a towel, like a bath towel. I don't know if it was like some weird comfort. I was still in my pajamas at this point. That towel remained with me through labour and post-labour, and it just became this almost like comfort thing, and honestly I can't even describe it. It was the weirdest thing. Anyway, we got in the car, and I guess context is it's a 30-minute drive to the hospital, but it was about, it was like we left home at 5:30 in the morning, or like 5:35. It was a really foggy morning because it was November, and it was a bit of a dodgy drive for Dan. I just remember it being quite rainy and foggy, but he got us there safely. In this car journey, I think I just got in the zone. I just remember closing my eyes the entire time, pretty much, and breathing through the contractions as I had learnt through the positive birthing thing. And I was just holding Dan's hand like when I could, and just to try and get through. Anyway, we like arrived at the hospital, and then when we got out of the car, it was like I just couldn't walk. I was thinking, I can't walk through these like contractions. So as soon as we got in and I got out of the car, I had to go on my hands and knees in the car park, had another contraction on the floor, on the towel, on this bloody towel, and it was like a little walk to the door. Had to have another contraction like on the hospital floor, like in the corridor. Managed to get up into the lift, again had another contraction in the lift, and we went straight to triage. I don't think we knew where the hell we were going at this point. We went back, and the same midwives were there from earlier that had given me the sweep, And I just remember her saying something like, oh, this is the lady that called me like half an hour ago. I think they probably thought I was being a bit dramatic. Like, I kind of came in hobbling and Dan was sort of like, help me, and they had to like help get me on the bed. And they were like, okay, we'll see where you're at, kind of thing. And I just remember, again, it was all a bit of a blur, and I just remember her going, oh, okay, yeah, you're fully dilated. And I just remember her going, call delivery suite now. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, okay, thank God. So they were like, would you like some gas and air? And I was like, yes, please. So I just remember them getting gas and air and thinking, this is amazing, after obviously not having anything, and obviously very shocked to myself that I'd managed to get to 10 centimetres without anything. Anyway, had this gas and air, and then they had to break it to me that I had to stop having the gas and air in order to get up to like delivery suite. And I just remember thinking, no. But they obviously took the thing out and I just kept holding on to the thing. So I don't know if I just like in my head was like pretending that I had the gas in there. Don't really remember the move up to delivery suite or really much of like the pushing element at all. I pretty sure from then like getting in that room to then her coming out, it was maybe like 45 minutes, but I'm not 100% sure, and I don't even think it's on like your notes or anything. I don't remember those midwives, but Dan thought they were great. And yeah, I had the gas and air, and I think at that point I suppose I just zoned out with the gas and air, and they were just sort of, they had to tell me to kind of keep coming off of it when I actually needed to push. And the only thing I really remember in that little bit is a lot of like our antenatal classes and a lot of like the birthing stuff just saying don't try to avoid giving birth on your back. And I visually think I was like, get me off my back. And then I basically went on all fours, and Dan doesn't remember it that way. He doesn't think I was that dramatic, so maybe I wasn't. Anyway, yeah, I went on hands and knees, and she then popped out, and I say popped out, it was more than popping out. So she arrived, I think, at 7:15 in the morning. So I would say my labour, like from proper contractions really kicking off, was from about 4 a.m. There is, I think, an official term for when your birth's under like 3 hours. Yeah, all in all, that was my birth story, basically. Very, very fast. I was very, very lucky. I only got 2nd degree internal tears, so thankfully nothing externally, and I actually didn't lose very much blood either. She did come out and she was £6.11, I think, because there was this whole like, was she £6.7 or was she £6.11? But I think she was £6.11. So she wasn't too small, she was just right, really. For context, I'm quite short, I'm small, I'm like 5 foot. It was likely that she was going to be a small baby anyway. So yeah, she came out and she was good. And then obviously at that point on, it was just all the after stuff, which I don't overly remember. I had the gas and air, had to have stitches. They were deciding whether I needed to go down to theatre for the stitches, but thankfully I didn't. And yeah, I won't go into like the post-labour stuff because I don't really feel like we had the best experience. But as I say, I think it transpired that the wards were like really overrun that week. So just think we were there at a bad time. I very much think if I can do it, then anybody can do it. And I'm not just saying that, but yeah, it's really hard to know what your pain threshold is like, I suppose, if you've never really been through like pain. And there was definitely pain, and I think I was particularly lucky that mine was so quick, and I don't really think I'd had much sleep that night to get me going, but equally I wasn't in labour for like days and hours, so I wasn't as exhausted as some. So I think I was generally very, very lucky with how it happened. I think we were also very lucky that we just went for it and just ignored advice and just went, because it would have been a whole other obviously situation if I'd have given birth in the car, or if I'd like had an emergency giving birth at home. I think that just, yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to share my story because I feel like it actually was positive in the end. I will leave it there. If you have got this far, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, give me a comment in the box below if you are expecting or if you have already had your baby, and yeah, wishing you the best of luck.